Does this 3-liter EcoDiesel engine deserve the bad reputation it gets? Well, as a diesel mechanic, I want to revisit this heavily criticized engine.
Let's fire this thing up. Oh yeah, she sounds healthy.
Welcome back to the channel, guys. Behind me we have a Ram 1500 with the 3-liter EcoDiesel, one of our good old shop trucks, used and abused. But today I want to focus on the 2nd-gen EcoDiesel engine from 2014 to 2018. Next week, we'll take a deep dive into the 3rd-gen EcoDiesel engine, which ran from 2019 to 2023, because there are some major differences between those two engines. I've been the first to criticize the EcoDiesel engine, and with some of the last new trucks being sold with the EcoDiesel engine, I figured it'd be a good time to kind of look back as to why this EcoDiesel engine was ultimately sort of seen as a failure. I guess I shouldn't say failure, but the engine was ultimately remembered as an engine with multiple issues, as well as just not being that reliable. Rewinding a little bit, in the late 2000s, GM and an Italian motor company called VM Motori were looking into designing a higher performance diesel engine for GM's Cadillac European automobile section. And unfortunately, in 2009, with the bankruptcy from GM, that project was kind of put on the back burner. And in 2011, 50% of VM Motori was bought by none other than Fiat. Later in that year, in the summer of 2011, Chrysler would release a Jeep Grand Cherokee in Australia with the A630 VM from VM Motori, and that would be known as the 1st-gen EcoDiesel in a Chrysler product. With rumors kind of flying, Chrysler eventually unveiled what is known as the 2nd-gen EcoDiesel in the Ram 1500s, known as the L630 VM diesel engine. The 2nd-gen EcoDiesel engine ran from 2014 to 2018 in these Ram 1500s, and there is a laundry list of issues with this generation of engine, which we will get into. However, it didn't start off like that. So this is a 2015 Ram 1500 with obviously the 3-liter EcoDiesel, and this thing has 381,000 kilometers, and you might think that's pretty impressive, but this is not the original engine. This is the 2nd engine in this truck, and this thing is pretty much on her way out as well. Glow plugs flash at us, we got check engine lights.
Listen to that nice rod knock. It's healthy.
So the first engine blew around 220,000 kilometers, and as you guys kind of saw, this thing is not far off from biting the dust as well. She's got a pretty good knock to her, especially when it's cold. This 2nd-gen EcoDiesel engine is a dual overhead cam V6 setup with a single turbo. Comes with an iron block as well as aluminum heads, which actually makes this engine heavier than the much larger 5.7-liter Hemi. This thing is putting out 240 horsepower as well as 420 pound-feet of torque, which at the time was pretty impressive. This thing could also tow up to 9,200 pounds, but in my opinion, the most impressive feature was the fuel economy. This thing would get 24 miles per gallon combined city and highway all day long, and it blew the doors off the competition when it came to engines that could tow almost 10,000 pounds. And speaking of towing, this thing would hit its peak torque 420 pound-feet at only 2,000 RPM, giving this engine a really nice peppy, torquey feel. Despite not being able to tow as much as the 5.7 Hemi, a lot of people reporting that it was really easy to tow with this engine. When this engine came out in 2014, it was praised up and down for its power, its ease of towing, as well as its efficiency. And this was Motor Trend's 2014 Truck of the Year, the Ram 1500 with the EcoDiesel. So on paper, at least, this was an absolute complete home run for Ram. The results speak for themselves because the amount of engine sales over the first couple of years far exceeded Ram's expectations, and it seemed like Ford and GM were kind of caught with their pants down, and they were both scrambling to get diesel engines into their 1500 trucks as well. But I think a lot of people fail to take into account that this is a modern diesel engine. And what does a modern diesel engine come with? A full emission system. It comes with EGR, DPFs, SCR, and DEF, diesel exhaust fluid. And I think people didn't fully understand the potential headache and the grief that comes with a modern diesel engine, if not maintained or driven properly. I think Ram, correctly so, marketed this truck as a very fuel efficient truck. And I think what happened is a lot of people that drive in the city have short commutes. They didn't want the gas guzzling 5.7 Hemi sucking on fuel stoplight to stoplight. So this was a perfect option, or so they thought. I think by about 2016, the cat was out of the bag, that the EcoDiesel engine was really not what was promised. And unfortunately, the emission headache was just the tip of the iceberg. The first major issue with these second-gen EcoDiesel engines is the cracked EGR cooler fiasco. Basically, the EGR coolers, they would crack internally and coolant would be leaking into the EGR system. So what the hell is an EGR cooler? Well, we'll use this big Detroit diesel engine as an example because everything's just so nice and open. So basically, your EGR exhaust gas recirculation pulls exhaust gases, brings them across the engine, and puts them back in the intake to be essentially reburned through the engine. However, those gases are going to be very hot because they're just coming out of the engine. What we want to do is try and cool them, and this is what an EGR cooler does. This is the EGR cooler here, and we use coolant to actually help cool the gases. So as the gases flow through the EGR cooler, the coolant cools them, and so when it goes back into the intake, the EGR gas is a little bit cooler, just makes things more efficient. Eventually the issue got so bad that Ram released a recall for over 100,000 trucks, most trucks between 2014 and 2016, citing potential fire hazards due to the leaking EGR cooler. The biggest issue, in my opinion, with the second-gen EcoDiesel engines, the one that would scare me the most is the bottom end failures with these engines. That's what took out the first engine in this truck. I believe a rod bearing let go. Once again, Ram conceded that there was an issue, releasing a technical service bulletin in 2016, trying to address these bottom end issues or bottom end failures. First of all, they changed the oil viscosity. They went from 5W30 to 5W40. Additionally, they updated the TCM, or the transmission software, to try and limit the lugging of this engine, which we'll talk about in a second. The bottom end bearing failures in this engine seem to have one of two causes. The first and main one is because apparently when this engine would be lugged down, the crankshaft could actually flex a little bit and it would take out bearings. I've even heard that the crankshafts can even snap when the engine lugs down so much, which is wild. And that is why, with that recall, Ram decided to reprogram the transmission so it would not lug this engine down so much. Unfortunately, this did result in some fuel economy loss. Also, when Ram introduced the heavier spec oil, the 5W40, I think a lot of people just thought it was for better lubrication. It had better lubrication properties, but realistically, it was probably introduced because it had better load pressure profiles, and the 5W30 oil originally that came with this engine just couldn't handle the loads put on it in this engine when in a pickup truck application. And we have to remember that this engine, this 3-liter EcoDiesel, was originally introduced and made by VM Motori to be in a passenger vehicle application. Originally, it was designed for Cadillac. And the fact that the crankshaft is flexing under load, I think, tells everything you need to know about this engine. It is a light-duty diesel, and it is just simply not meant to be in a pickup truck with such heavy duty cycles and workloads. The second reason why the bottom ends would fail on these EcoDiesel engines is because of clogged oil passages to the main bearings. Apparently, those passages would get carboned up and either partially cut off oil supply or fully cut off oil supply. And without oil going to your main bearings, it's only a short matter of time before those things kind of self-destruct. And I guess some people are blaming because, well, these engines do run very sooty and there's a lot of EGR gas coming back into it. Some people like to blame that, and that soot gets down into the oil, and that's what that carbon residue is that's blocking those oil passages. But those are the two main reasons why the bottom ends fail on these EcoDiesel engines. And finally, there was the EPA emission recall with this EcoDiesel, which was kind of a gong show, to be honest. In, I believe, January of 2017, the EPA announced to Chrysler that they were in violation of the Clean Air Act because they were releasing too much NOx gases into the atmosphere. This resulted in millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in fines, as well as class action lawsuits. And it was just not a good look for these EcoDiesel engines. Once again, over 100,000 trucks were recalled, most trucks from 2014 to 2016. The end result for the owners of those trucks was that they need to get a recall, an emission recall, and it's pretty well documented that after this recall, these engines lost fuel economy, acceleration, and power, and owners were not happy about it. So when it comes to the reputation of the second-gen EcoDiesel not being reliable, I think it's pretty well earned. First off is just the constant emission issues, the emission headaches. I think a lot of people bought this second-gen EcoDiesel engine that probably shouldn't have. And well, it just resulted in a ton of headaches and a lot of complaints from the owners. There's also those big three issues that we talked about, the constantly failing EGR coolers, the bottom end issues, and then obviously the EPA emission recalls. And the list kind of keeps on going. This engine was known for constant coolant leaks. This thing came with a CP4 fuel pump, which I just don't like, as well as being known for turbo failures. In fact, I actually saw a turbo fail in person. Me and a friend were towing a skid steer back from Northern Ontario, and I just bought my Power Wagon, and I wanted to get some footage with it towing as well as just feel how it handled the load. So I towed it halfway, and then he towed it the rest of the way home with his EcoDiesel. And when we exchanged the trailer, it wasn't 5 minutes later, I got a phone call saying that he blew his turbo up, and we later found out that the turbo actually took out the whole engine. So turbo failures do happen on these EcoDiesel engines. The last issue that seems to get a lot of attention is the passenger side exhaust cam gear slipping on its shaft, and this results in, well, piston meeting valve and basically complete engine failure. It seems like this issue may actually be a little bit overblown. It does seem like it's a little bit rare, but there are definitely documented cases of it happening. In my opinion, I think there are a lot more issues to worry about before you need to start going down that road. So with all that being said, there are still a lot of people who absolutely love their EcoDiesels, and when the engine is running well, it is a highly advantageous engine. Like I said, tons of down low torque, it's got good power, it's extremely efficient. So when it is running, it runs very well, and I can see why a ton of people do really enjoy these engines. Overall, I do have to applaud Ram for kind of sticking their neck out and, you know, kind of throwing a wrench into the 1500 truck segment and trying to really change things up, because the idea of a smaller displacement diesel engine in a 1500 truck is a wonderful idea, except that Ram just really didn't pick the right engine, unfortunately. The EcoDiesel engine was a light-duty engine originally designed to be in a passenger vehicle in the European market. And I think, at least in this second-gen EcoDiesel engine, it was pretty evident that it was just not up to the task of the duty cycle and the workload of an American pickup truck. As always, guys, let me know what you think. If you've owned one of these EcoDiesel engines, if you liked it, if you hated it, if you had good luck, bad luck, let me know. Always like hearing what you guys have to say. If you did like the video, don't forget to leave that thumbs up. And if you like cool stuff like this, don't forget to subscribe. We'd love to have you on board. Anyways, enough of me. We'll see you in the next freaking video.